As we've explored on this program, burnout among healthcare professionals is a pressing national challenge, with prevalence rates reaching as high as 50%. In response, many healthcare organizations focus on measuring employee engagement or satisfaction as a starting point. Interestingly, these measurements often reveal a surprising pattern. Engagement rates aren't uniform across the organization. We frequently see some teams or departments scoring very high in engagement, while others, sometimes right down the hall, report much lower levels. So, what factors drive these differences? There are times in our lives that change the way we see the world. Navigating these challenges can take insight, trusted confidants, or even a coach. Let's explore those moments. In this companion podcast to RX for Success, we will discover ways to learn and write our own success stories together. I'm Dr. Dael Waxman, a physician coach with MD Coaches, and this is Life-Changing Moments. Today's guest has studied this issue extensively and developed a model to help those less engaged teams move toward thriving. By way of introduction, Paula Davis is the founder and CEO of the Stress and Resilience Institute. With a background in law and extensive research in the field of positive psychology, Paula has a unique understanding of high-stress professions and the specific challenges that they present. Her work focuses on developing practical, evidence-based strategies for enhancing team dynamics, creating supportive environments, and building resilience, all in support of those organizations and individuals that prioritize well-being. On a personal note, I've relied on Ms. Davis's book, Beating Burnout at Work, when facilitating workshops for healthcare organizations. Her strategies are straightforward, practical, and easy to integrate into broader well-being initiatives. Of all the resources available, I've found this one to be the most impactful for organizations that are committed to sustainable change. So, Paula Davis, welcome to the Life-Changing Moments podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm most excited to be talking to you today.
I know that you and I just talked about this, but some of our listeners might want to know where you are geographically. So tell us a little bit about where you're located.
Yes, I am sitting in my office right now in Elm Grove, Wisconsin, which is a very small little suburb of Milwaukee, so southeastern Wisconsin.
And you were saying that the fall color, we're recording this in late October, and the fall colors are pretty nice right now.
They are absolutely stunning. And I just this past weekend, I was saying it on Sunday, it was 80 degrees. I happened to be lucky enough to go up to the Green Bay Packer football game at Lambeau Field and sit in the 80-degree sunshine on October 20th, which almost never happens here. So it was most pleasant.
I'm imagining Green Bay Packer fans don't know what to do when it's 80 degrees.
Not 80 degrees in October.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
We're a little out of sorts. Yes.
Exactly. Well, let's talk. You have made such incredible contributions to the world of burnout, but more importantly to well-being and resilience. And we're going to dive into both of those to those a little bit more as we go along. But I'd really like to start with, where did this come from? What inspired you to focus on these areas specifically?
So I come to this work, I come to all of you as a recovering lawyer. So I practiced law for 7 years, and I ended up burning out during what became the last year of my law practice. And it's so funny because this was in 2009, and if I take everyone back to 2008, 2009, I really didn't know what burnout was. And again, it's funny for me to sit here today in 2024 and say that, but I really didn't. And I knew something was off. I knew something was wrong. I knew the stress that I was experiencing was getting worse and not better. And the tips and tricks and things that I had used prior in my law practice and law school and other places just really weren't working. And it was frustrating and scary. And it took me quite a while to figure out really what this process was. In fact, I ended up diagnosing myself, and it was after I left my law practice and started to dig into my master's studies, on workplace flourishing and the science of positive psychology, that I realized what I had gone through actually had a name. And it made me very interested to not only kind of focus on workplace well-being generally, but to really dig into what burnout was and what caused it, and how did I end up, in that boat. And I didn't really know many other people, I don't think, who had gone through burnout, or certainly didn't use those words. And so I wanted to start to think about what could I learn? What could I teach? What could I research to help other people not go down this path?
It's interesting you're saying this. I have some friends who are attorneys, and when I talk a little bit about some of the work that I do with coaching for well-being and burnout prevention, almost all of them say we need to talk to lawyers also. And so it's not something that, I'm in the medical world, so I certainly know it there. I don't know much about the awareness there is in the legal field, maybe more now because of what you've gone through. I wonder if we can go back, and do you mind sharing a little bit about what you were experiencing, what you later came to understand as burnout, and what was going on in your head at that time?
Yes. And I think one of the things that's really important to punctuate as we go about talking about this and answering this question is that burnout really unfolds in phases, and that there's a spectrum of burnout. And I think when in popular media and just conversations, we hear the word burnout, we think of somebody who is so exhausted and so far gone, and really having a dramatic experience to the stress that they are encountering at work. And in reality, when I really sort of mapped out the spectrum for myself and traced it back to when I kind of think it probably started, what I was experiencing more wasn't what I would think of as more in sort of like the mental health realm. It was just more in the sense that I was really procrastinating a lot because I was really tired, because I couldn't get my energy up, because I was starting to feel really disengaged with my work. I started to roll into work later and later. And as a lawyer, I didn't have an actual, punch the clock start time or a shift that I had to be part of. But in little increments, I would, start coming into work like 10 minutes later, then 20 minutes later, then 30 minutes later. And finally, someone from the general counsel's office actually came down to me at one point. It came down to my office and said, is everything okay? We're noticing that you're typically the last person in, each day. And I thought, oops, I've gone a little bit too far. I need to, kind of pull that back. But that procrastination piece was a big one. I was having a harder time concentrating. I had started to think that I was already starting to envision, a potential path outside of the legal profession, although I still wasn't sure whether that would happen or not, and thought maybe I was going to become a pastry chef. And so I would spend some of my time in the mornings, instead of focusing on my leases, I practiced commercial real estate law and the other things I had to do with my actual work, researching recipes for the bakery that I thought I may one day own. So was that. There was a lot of procrastination, a lot of lack of concentration, a lot of just general frustration and annoyance with people. And I really liked my colleagues. I absolutely loved my boss. My normal personality is not to be annoyed or frustrated with people, particularly people who I work with, particularly not my clients. And so when I noticed that, I would come in and I would close the door to my office and I would think to myself right away, please don't bother me. Please don't come find me. Please don't send me an email. Please just don't come in with your fire drill. Like, can't you see, world? I need a moment of peace and ability to somehow settle into my work. And of course, obviously, they didn't know that, right? Because you don't wear a sign saying I'm burning out or that there's something wrong. So those were some of the initial kind of pieces that I noticed. And then as it progressed over time, that's when I would say more of the physical, certainly the next layer for me was some of the physical manifestations. So I would notice that like the adrenaline of, just working on such a high profile, real estate deal, for example, would keep me very alert. It would keep me lawyering well. But as soon as our deals would finish, it was like that adrenaline pipeline shut off and my body would just crash. And so I had a lot of colds. I got sick a lot with like the flu, headaches a lot more frequently. And so it was like my body was trying to send me messages like, you're overloaded here. Like, let's hit pause. And so that ramped up and started to happen more frequently. And then eventually, as I got kind of closer to, like the probably 6 to 9 month plus mark of going through this, I started to get panic attacks almost every day. And so I'm somebody who is wired with anxiety. I have experienced panic attacks on and off since I've been a teenager. They ramped up in law school, but then subsided. And so it's sort of like cyclical with some of the big stress moments in my life. And so they had certainly ramped up again. And I remember even in the middle of a negotiation. So I was, sitting in a conference room with, some of our real estate team. We were negotiating, a lease or a document, and I felt one coming on. And so luckily we were close to the end of the meeting and I was able to just kind of rush it, finish it up. And I just bolted to the on-site health care clinic thinking like, I'm dying, something's going really, really wrong. And that started to happen very, very regularly. And I ultimately ended up in the emergency room twice because I had really, really bad stomach aches. I would wake up in the middle of the night with really bad stomach aches and I couldn't even like stand up fully because of it. And so again, it was just, more physiological reaction to all of the stress and the pieces that I was experiencing. And it, the second time coming out of the emergency room where I really had a serious conversation with myself and was like, you're a high achiever and this is all wonderful, but like, you cannot keep doing this. Like, this just cannot happen. And, when I speak with healthcare audiences, it's one of the things that I punctuate, and maybe it's a little bit different now, but back in 2009, I mean, between the appointments for panic attacks and the appointments, in the emergency room, and then the follow-up, visits with my doctor, no one ever asked me, no one in the medical community ever asked me, like, how is your stress? How are you doing? How's your life going? How is work going? Right. And I think I was waiting for someone to just sort of start that conversation for me because I couldn't feel like I could have it on my own. Because if someone had asked me that question, I think I just would have burst into tears and just kind of flooded out with like, it's not going well, like however you sort of like would answer that. And so, I always encourage folks in healthcare to, include some of those questions when you're talking with people. And a lot of people might just say fine and blow it off, but you never know when you might hit someone like me who needed to have an outsider really kind of signal that for me, because I was just so kind of lost in the actual burnout that I didn't really know how to even open up about it.
Are you a doctor struggling to provide the best care for your patients while dealing with financial and caregiving matters out of the scope of your practice? Do you find yourself scrambling to keep up with the latest resources and wish there was an easier way? Then this virtual caregiver conference resource will save you time, money, and sanity by giving you all the resources and information your patients need in one place. This conference helps you and your patients enlist the best strategies around healthcare resources and the best financial steps for your patients while navigating caregiving situations. You don't have to go home feeling frustrated and helpless because you couldn't connect your patients with the best services. Find out more at jeanniedoherty.com or click in the link in the show's notes. You don't want to miss this caregiver resource.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but first, I'd like to share a message from Navigate. After spending years in the financial sector, Navigate has met lots of clients with all kinds of student loan issues. They were confused, they were overwhelmed by the doublespeak and the overly complex forms, and especially the deliberately misleading statements from loan servicer representatives. Navigate recognized the chaos in the student loan industry and immediately brought clarity and real solutions. If you'd like to flip the script on student debt, visit www.flipthescript.loan/MD-coaches to schedule a call with Navigate. They'll tailor a plan specifically for your unique situation and work with you until the loan is paid off. What do you have to lose besides the stress of student loan debt?
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests. Whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics, Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication.
Just from the medical side of things, the recognition of the physical manifestations of stress is relatively new in our understanding, and it's not usually doesn't make the top of the list of our differential diagnoses, and so we have some work to do still. But I think that I think that people are getting better at asking about context and learning something about what's going on in the rest of the system. But that's a great suggestion to remember, reminder.
Yeah, it's been interesting too for me. Just even now in my own experiences with my own providers, they'll oftentimes ask me, now most of them I've been patients for a while and they're familiar with me and my work, but they'll start asking me about my work and what I do, and we'll inevitably get into a conversation about their own burnout, or I think maybe I'm going in that direction. I've actually had a couple of doctors switch practice areas. A couple of my doctors switch practice areas specifically because of burnout. So yeah, it's been a conversation that I've had in an ongoing way over the years with healthcare professionals.
Right. And I know that you're aware of the incidents amongst healthcare professionals as well. Bringing it back to you. So what did you do? What was your next step for yourself?
So, and that was a process. That's one of the things that I think that can scare people about how do I prevent burnout? And if I find myself burned out, what can I do? Because I think I'm probably more the exception to the rule in terms of, deciding to leave my profession entirely and pivot and go completely into a different direction. From the folks that I've talked to or coached about burnout, oftentimes, some of them have done something completely different, but oftentimes it's figuring out how do we kind of stay within the confines of what it is that I am trained for or doing. So it took me a while. I had to sort through, do I want to stay in the legal profession? And I honestly tried with my boss, who I mentioned, I absolutely loved. And I went to him and I fumbled through the conversation and didn't really know kind of how to say it. But I said, I'm really sort of worn out on all of these real estate deals. Could I do something else? Because, it's a whole legal department. Could I, just work on general contract stuff? Can I do some, trademark intellectual property stuff? I would, felt like that could have re-energized me in a way. And he was very open to it, but the senior folks in our department and elsewhere were not, and they they really need me to stay staff doing what I was doing, and so that was frustrating. And then I thought about going back to the firm that I was at, and for a number of reasons that just wasn't a great option, and so and I started to think, all right, if I'm leaving the legal profession, what can I do? Like, what should I do? And so I ended up hiring a coach. I hired a life coach for, I don't know if she holds herself out as that, but that's what I'm calling her. I happened to be traveling somewhere and I opened up a copy of Success Magazine in the airport. And there was a little article that she had written. And so I called her up and, we started a coaching relationship, and she had just finished the Master's in Applied Positive Psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania. And so she started to tell me about that. And I was like, what is that? That sounds amazing. Like my undergrad degree is in psychology. And I absolutely love that science. And she was explaining it to me, and I was just becoming more and more excited about what that was. And so I just dug into it, ended up applying to the program and got in. And I mean, just really keeping my eyes open and seeing like what could potential next steps be is what carried me to that program. And even going into the program, I still don't even think I was like stopped my law practice in June of 2009 and started the master's program in September of 2009. Looking back on it now, I mean, I was still recovering from burnout. I mean, I really was, in a state where I needed a pause, and I had done some coach certification training, and I had officially like quote started my business, but I really had no idea what I was going to do other than sort of this big picture idea of, workplace well-being. And I don't even think it was called that back then. And so I just went into the master's program thinking, or, with an open mind saying, there's something here. I know over the course of this next year, I'm going to find something that I can apply to myself, that I can learn about this stuff, that I can teach potentially to other people. And there was. So, I mean, it was really the whole, kind of key that unlocked everything going forward. So
yeah, I hear you. And I know that you were in that graduate program, and I know there was some research, and I know there was some work with the military, and I want to bring us forward so that listeners can really benefit from the what you have pulled together. And it's so interesting that you were burnt out, and then that is one of the foci that you have in terms of what's going on in the work environment that can contribute to that. So I want to begin that discussion, bringing us forward to that. Your first book, which I highly recommend for anybody who is interested in bringing this work to their organization, is called Beating Burnout at Work. And the subtitle of it is Why Teams Hold the Secret to Well-Being and Resilience. So what I want to ask you, Paula, is what is it about teams that can mitigate burnout?
Sure. Yes. So when I, was coming out of my own burnout experience and starting my master's program, and even through that, I was very much focused on the me side of the equation, both in terms of how in the world, Paula, did you find yourself in this situation? What stress management memo did you miss? What could you have done differently? What is it about your wiring that sent you down this path? And then teaching a lot of those individual facing strategies, not only within the military, but then certainly outside of the military, once that chunk of program that I was involved in was done. And it was through those conversations. And then I started to interview more people about their burnout experiences. And I kept hearing, and it kept coming back to, thank you, this is great, but my boss is a micromanager. How do I prevent my own burnout if I'm working in an environment where there's too much pressure, or my workload is crazy and I can't keep up, or fill in the blank? I kept hearing so many other, but yes, I'm in an environment that is also contributing to this. And it took me a while to really kind of see that this was a big piece of the equation. And then I went back into the research and started to see that it is a big piece of the burnout prevention equation, is how we address the causes, the workplace stressors and root causes of this, that a lot of those conversations weren't being had. And so I started to really just kind of, think about, a lot of the resilience piece that I was teaching, is there or could there be an application of resilience at the team level, perhaps? And so started to dig into the research, and just generally, we're finding some consistent themes across. If we use teams as a way, if we built resilient teams, might we together be able to start to foster and create an environment where we could slow stress down and where we could start to catch burnout quicker? And so that's really kind of the stepwise evolution that happened. And I realized that if we could be both, because to me, teams are leaders and then they're, people on the team itself. And so if we could be both tackling what am I bringing to the table, but also together, kind of the we side of the equation. So that's why I say we need to take a me and a we approach to all of this. Might we be able to actually make some inroads in this versus just focusing on only the individual side of the equation in the conversation? And so for me, that's how I think now. I think in teams. If I'm talking about workplace culture, for me, my mind just goes to team culture. I think it's easier to sort of apply some of these ideas to the small little mini systems teams that exist within the larger kind of organizational system. It just seems like a more doable way to tackle this issue.
I have a specific question about some of the characteristics of high-functioning teams, but I want to pause before that just to recognize, because I know that some of our listeners are going to be talking about all the different factors that create burnout in the healthcare system. And we know that there's very thick levels of administrative stuff that have kind of got layered on in the last 20 to 30 years. And yet, and I don't know whether this is in your book or something in your book triggered me to notice this, that in healthcare systems, all of those people in the healthcare system are dealing with that thick layer of administration. And yet, there are pockets where people are doing really, really well. They're very highly engaged. They're very happy. People want to go work in that, in that section. And there are pockets where things are not doing very well at all. And to me, that's what's really key about your work. The healthcare system, we all have the same stresses, and yet there are teams that do really well. So what are some of those key characteristics of high-functioning teams?
Yes. So high-functioning teams are very, very much promotive of, first of all, psychological safety. So that sense of trust, that sense of being able to talk about failure and problems and setbacks and innovative ideas. And, I have an idea for something, but I haven't really thought it through. Can we chat about it together, talk about it at a huddle perhaps, and, just toss it around a little bit and see what comes of it, that we can do all of those things without the fear that we're going to be put down, embarrassed, singled out, talked about, whispered about, sort of after the fact or what have you. So there's a deep sense of that trust among high-performing teams. High-performing teams, and I go into this a lot more in the work that I'm doing right now, but they also are very promotive of what are called psychological needs. So everyone, when we roll into work, there are three big things that we really need to feel a sense of engagement and intrinsic motivation. And that is, we need and want a sense of autonomy. So not individualism or go it alone autonomy, but a sense of flexibility and control. And I think about it as like choose your own adventure. So if you know those choose your own adventure books where you got to dictate sort of the next step in the story, we want that sense of volition over our work and our lives. We want and need a sense of community and belonging. And we really want and need a sense of challenge and growth. So we want to know that we are moving forward in our careers as somebody in our realm, our leaders in our realm, understanding of what it is that we're doing and where we want to go and helping us really get to those points. But high-performing teams also are very, again, they prioritize and promote really strong relationships with each other and within the organization. So very high-quality relationships where that sense of mattering and belonging is really amplified. They are also very promotive of what I just labeled mental strength. So people have a keen sense of when there are problems and challenges and things that can really interfere, stressors that can interfere with our ability to think well and not overthink or catastrophize or what have you, that they're very good at sorting out kind of those cognitive and thinking sort of styles and patterns and what have you. And really, really important, they have a very keen sense of the impact that they are making. That's either talked about within the team or, very much just kind of from their own personal perspective. They know that they are really making a difference. They know that their work is making an impact, and they see and they get messages about that either from the team or their environment, or again, just intrinsically. So it's kind of that unique little cluster of traits that makes those pockets and those teams really be able to, rise to the occasion when challenges happen and just generally thrive in a very stressful environment.
So we know that those can kind of come together spontaneously, but I know that your work is, if it's not like that already, we can teach those skills, or you can facilitate so that teams will create some of those qualities. I wonder if you have any stories where that's actually happened, where teams may not have been functioning optimally, but they actually did move into what you just described.
So yeah, there's a number of different, just sort of smaller instances that I can think of across industry. One of the pieces, though, from a healthcare standpoint that I was really struck by was when I had the chance to earlier this year interview the COO for a really large healthcare system. And one of the healthcare system's top priorities, I knew this because they had invited me to speak at an event the prior year and talked a lot about this notion of like impact and recognition and appreciation and mattering. And it hit me in such I hadn't seen that level of priority of those types of issues or skills really elevated in a way that they had done it. And so when I talked to the COO, I wanted to kind of unlock some of that thinking, like why are you prioritizing this so much? And, we really dug into a pretty in-depth conversation about, from a board standpoint, because the value of, recognition and mattering really being wired into one of their top 3 strategic initiatives and priorities that goes all the way up to their board. And I don't hear a lot of companies talking like this soft stuff is like one of our critical board strategies and priorities. And so he just realized that over time, there's just so many people in financial outcomes, positive people in financial outcomes tied simply just to appreciation, mattering, impact, recognition, that whole cluster of things. And he's been able to demonstrate, since they've had this as part of their strategic goals, they have it wired into, part of their key performance, indicators, their KPI. People's bonuses and other financial metrics are tied to how well they are evaluated in this space. But he just talks about the tremendous growth that they've seen from a financial standpoint, the hard decisions that they have had to make in terms of realizing people, in some cases, very senior people, aren't walking the talk in this respect. And so, the hard decisions that they had to make sometimes about letting people go because they just weren't living by those particular values. And so that's just one instance where it's you see it at the top most levels, and it trickles down through the entire organization to ground floor, entry level. This is how we are going to react or act. And, he talked to me just again about the great financial outcomes. And I think that's an important piece of this conversation, tying all of this to what are we seeing in terms of financial benefits. It's just how a lot of leaders and organizations think and have to think. So that was very illuminating.
Sounds like being intentional about the values is a key step from the top. I guess what I was thinking about was if I'm a member of a not very high functioning team and don't feel psychological safety, or let's say I'm the leader of that team, but where do I start? Let's say that my team is not performing very well. What's a start for me?
Sure. There's a couple of things. I think if you're thinking in terms of the burnout conversation, if you're worried about burnout specifically or chronic stress or disengagement, there's a fantastic empirically there's a number of them and folks who know a lot in this space. There's certainly more than this one, but there's an empirically validated assessment tool that I use a lot called the Areas of Work Life Survey. And it's one that really helps leaders, I think, start to hone in on in teams what are really the true root causes or sources of burnout and chronic stress for us. So that then someone like me or someone within the team or someone within the organization can come in and have a very targeted conversation or put a plan in place in a very particular, very specific way that's going to lead them in the direction to solve those root, or to at least better address those root causes and sources of stress. So there's that. And then in my book, I created, and this is not empirically validated, but this was just meant for me to give leaders some place to start, what I called my resilient teams inventory. So mapped onto those different components that we talked about, I have different statements associated with psychological safety and impact and other factors that leaders and teams can take to say, oh, so sort of a little bit more granularly, here are some things or areas that we're struggling in. There's also a starting point for us too, to say, here's what's going well. We need to capitalize on this again. And then here are some other entry points for us to start with.
Yeah, nice. That's great. So start with assessment, find out where the issues are, which is what the kind of the way doctors think anyway, right? So
it is, but it's interesting. And in the workplace well-being conversation, we oftentimes don't do that. We're oftentimes, I think this is one of the things that's pulled us away from, I think, some of the benefits of what companies are doing, is that we continue to sort of think in this like limited, random, let's try this general sort of well-being, one-off wellness sort of tactics, which are all wonderful and great, but I think they'll do their job more and better once we start to add some of these other teams-based components to them. So being a little bit more intentional and measuring and coaching and really helping leaders and team members be able to put tools and strategies in place, I think is huge.
Yeah. And I know that your work is not just with teams that are not functioning well, but teams that are functioning pretty well, but want to function even better.
Yes, which is an important piece of the conversation too, right? It maybe we're not going down in flames, but we're just, maybe kind of middle of the road, or, limping along in a way where we know that we can be better, or a certain pivot point has happened, and we want to now kind of use this as an opportunity to reset and refresh and take our team to the next level.
Paul, I want to just switch the focus just a tad. You've mentioned this word already, resilience and resilience building. And the reason I'm bringing this up, you probably are aware, in the healthcare world, there's been some drastic mistakes in using that word, telling physicians that you're not resilient enough when they were burnt out. And so it's kind of a naughty word amongst physicians. However, there is a whole movement to reclaim it, I will say, when we really look at what it is, especially since the research has shown that physicians tend to be more resilient than the general population on resilience scales. You mentioned it, so I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to talk about what do you mean by resilience building?
Yes, I love that we are going in this direction, because I think that, so first of all, I think everyone's heard the term, whether it's through the workplace or just generally out in the world, I think we all have heard the word resilience. And I think it is one of the most misunderstood words in our world of work. And also, I have heard some of those sentiments start to creep up in the legal profession and in other places as well. And so, but I know that it can be a very hot button topic and issue in healthcare. And so I go back into the research always with these moments and tell sort of like, what is the research-based definition for what resilience is? And so resilience is really two parts. It's our capacity to be able to deal with and manage adversity, challenge, change, obstacles, setbacks, failures, problems, that whole constellation of things. And as humans, the vast majority of us are hardwired to deal with challenges and problems and obstacles and setbacks in a resilient way. But when you think about all of the pressures and uncertainties and stressors that physicians and providers and high achievers face in the world of work, there are a lot of things now in our world of work that can throw us off our resilience game in a way that limits or narrows our capacity to meet those challenges and those moments of stress in the way that we want to, whatever that means for us. So it's essentially, I think about it as like a bucket. Like some days we've got that capacity, that resilience capacity is really high. Some days it stays high or some moments it stays high for a while. And other times it's like we're a hot mess for some reason. And it's just, we need to then be able to lean on strategies to help us with that. So that's a big piece of it. And then the second piece is that it's more than just bouncing back. It's about bouncing forward also. So when we go through challenges and problems and setbacks and failures and stressors, what is the meaning? What is the lesson we're supposed to learn from those situations so that we can apply them to future challenges going forward? So maybe I don't stay stuck as long the next time I have a problem, right? I can go like, oh, I remember I went through something like that a couple of years ago. I remember I called my best friend and she really, really helped me. So I'm going to lean on my relationships now or other people to help me through this next challenge that we go through. And when we say challenge and stressor, it's small a challenge and stressor adversity. It's also big A challenge, stressor, adversity, right? So I think that all of those things are really important. We are hardwired to come into situations with a sense of resilience. We all have resilience. Where the problem starts to come in is when it's either we hear it as such or it's messaged as such, like someone is saying, we're only giving you these resilience strategies or telling you have to be more resilient so that we can coax more productivity out of you, or we can coax more hours out of you, or this is a tough environment. And so, we're going to give you some strategies to so that you can navigate a tough environment. And resilience isn't about tolerating toxic cultures. It's not about tolerating, unsafe or unhealthy work environments, or, when people are truly being bad leaders and bad managers and very toxic in their approach, because I know that can certainly happen as folks go through their medical education. I hear a lot of those stories. For me, it's always just been this, why wouldn't we, if I say it to you, do you feel you want your teams to be just better able to, or equipped to, or more quickly able to maneuver through all of the things, all of the challenges and stressors that they have to face on a day-to-day basis, so they can do that more capably and ably? Most people, when I ask them that question, say yes. And that's all we're talking about with resilience.
So I have one more question. Some of the coaching clients that I've worked with, one of the things that comes up is like, I'm all in for the team thing. There's us on the team, and then there's the leader who doesn't seem to quite get this. Yeah, doesn't quite get it. And we're like a lot of, raised eyebrows and looking at each other and, rolling eyes and all that. And so there's always this question, what do I do about that if the leader doesn't get it? We want to move in a different direction, but the leader doesn't quite get it. Do you have some suggestions for people who might be in that situation?
When you say moving in this direction, like if we want to build a better team, if we see possibility in our team becoming great, and our leader is just either checked out or micromanaging or whatever, just doesn't get it or doesn't care, what can we do? And I think that becomes really tough because newer research points to the fact that, not only are leaders important in this conversation, they're really crucial in this conversation, to the point where some research has suggested that leaders are 70% of the variance for team engagement. So they have that much influence over it. And so I think if your leader is not bought in, if they don't care, if they're checked out, if they're, fill in the blank, I think it's just going to be really, really tough to advance collectively as a team those efforts. So I think what you're almost left with then is, again, it depends on the size of the team. It depends on, the different pockets of interaction that you have within the team. But if you have strong relationships and a number of you at least are on the same page about wanting to get better or more resilient, or you want more meaning or fulfillment or engagement or motivation or whatever that word is, you can certainly start to work on and apply a number of tools and strategies together. It's going to be hard to collectively move that along and amplify it in a big enough way without the leader being involved, which of course isn't an answer that folks want to hear, but it's just really hard. It's just really, really hard when a leader is not on board. And that's part of what my work involves and has really started to morph into and become, is to try and make that case for leaders, whether it's through a business case, whether it's through a risk management case, trying different arguments for going back to my lawyer days, entry points or ways to have leaders really start to think about, you're leaving a lot of money on the table by not prioritizing a lot of these things. You are exposing health and well-being and mental health for folks by not prioritizing, a number of these things. And so to try and paint that picture in a very clear way to say, like, you got to be involved with this on some level. But it's also hard because, one of the fastest growing categories for rates of burnout is among leaders, especially in healthcare, steering through the pandemic and the gauntlet that you all faced. Coming out of that and just being like, okay, give me a minute, right? Because this was significant. And now all of a sudden we've got all of these uncertainties and economic uncertainties and other pressures that we're facing down. It's sort of like, give me a second. I didn't even have a moment to catch my breath. And
Right.
now you're coming along and telling me I have to add to my plate, well-being and like making my team motivated. I'm just trying to get through the day. So
Yeah.
There's a lot of layers to unpack there.
Yes, there are. But I appreciate that. I appreciate their thoughtful response there. Well, Paula, this has been an incredibly great conversation. I really enjoy this and especially enjoyed the book. And as I was sharing with you before we started, I've actually used a lot of the work from your book and some of the talks that I've given around the country. I want to give you a chance. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you feel would be important for this audience to hear something about? And then also there's an opportunity. I know you have a new book coming out soon, and tell us a little bit about that as well. So both of those.
Yeah, I think the parting words that I typically oftentimes will say to a group are to really try to start to normalize the conversation on your team or amongst yourselves about stress. I think where we start to go in a little bit of a wrong direction is when we think like, I can't say anything, or I must be the only one who is feeling stress or what have you. And I think the more conversations that teams can just have about, the different challenge, and you don't even need to say stress, here's some challenges that we faced this last week. Here's how, we're processing that and doing well with that, right? Just continuing the conversation about normalizing, those tough experiences, I think is really important. So that would be my parting words for that. Yes. And so then on the horizon is book number 2, which is really an extension of what we just talked about, right? So it's been particularly over the last 4 to 5 years, me being in amongst a lot of leaders and teams and hearing the same types of problems and challenges coming up over and over again that are standing in the way of them being able to create a thriving culture, to create motivation. A lot of people feeling disengaged and then telling me the same reasons why. I really wanted to distill that down into a leadership manual of sorts for leaders at all levels who want to start to build more of those thriving, positive cultures. And I've turned them into 5 key mindsets that they want to have. And so the book is called Lead Well, 5 mindsets to engage, retain, and inspire your team. So very much what they can do now, but also taking a future of work, future focused lens to why these mindsets are going to be important down the road as well.
That sounds awesome, and I'm looking forward to reading it. And just for readers to know that we're expecting that early in 2025, right?
Yes, February 4th, 2025.
So we'll be sure to put a bookmark on our calendar for that so that we can take a look at that. Well, Paula, thank you very much for being on Life Changing Moments and enlightening us and sharing your story and then taking that story and applying it to many different industries. But we certainly appreciate the work that you've done in healthcare as well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Life Changing Moments. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to rate us 5 stars and leave a review. Doing so helps our podcast reach more listeners. Have something to share? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Visit the MD Coaches community on Facebook groups. This dynamic virtual space is a place to continue discussion about life-changing moments and perhaps share some life-changing moments of your own. Join the conversation today.